All right, let's get right into it. Have you ever really thought about how your company decides on that exact number on your paycheck? I mean, it can feel like a total mystery, right? But believe it or not, there's actually a detailed plan behind it all. So today, we are pulling back the curtain on how your salary really gets made.
So, is your salary just some random number they pull out of a hat? Or is there a logical system behind the scenes? Well, the good news is, for most companies, it's not random at all. It's actually the result of a very deliberate, thought-out process.
In that whole process, it revolves around something called a pay structure. The best way to think about it is like a blueprint for a house. Its entire purpose is to build a fair and logical framework that assigns different pay rates to jobs that, well, have different levels of value to the company. So here's our game plan for walking through this blueprint. First, we'll look at the foundation. Then, we'll get into the nitty-gritty of how it's built, step by step. After that, we'll see where you fit into the picture, how your performance gets rewarded, and finally, we'll touch on a few special cases that don't quite fit the mold. You see, a really solid pay structure does way more than just figure out salaries. It gives a company the basic framework it needs to recognize that different employees contribute in different ways. It is the absolute foundation for fair pay.
So, how do companies actually build this thing from the ground up? It's not guesswork, that's for sure. It's a methodical process with some very clear steps, all designed to bring some order and fairness to how people get paid.
And it really boils down to these 5 key stages. First, they figure out how many different blueprints they're going to need. Then they have to look at what the outside market is doing. After that, they start grouping jobs into grades, they calculate the salary ranges for those grades, and then finally, they step back and make sure the whole system actually works.
So in that first step, a company has to decide if one size fits all or if they need a few different blueprints. For example, they might have one structure for their hourly, non-exempt employees, the folks who are eligible for overtime, and a totally different one for salaried employees. Or they might have separate structures for, say, their tech team versus their clerical staff, or even for different cities where the cost of living is way different.
Okay, once they know how many structures they need, it's time for step 2, looking outside their own walls. A company just can't exist in a bubble. To get good people to work there and to keep them, they have to know what the competition is paying for similar jobs.
To make this all feel a bit more real, let's follow an example. Meet the clerk job family. As you can see, the jobs progress from a clerk I, which is your basic entry-level role, all the way up to a chief clerk. And obviously, each step up requires more experience and a lot more responsibility. Now, this chart is where it gets really interesting. This is what's called a market pay line. So that horizontal axis on the bottom, that's the internal value of a job, which companies measure in something called job evaluation points. It's basically a score for things like skill level and responsibility. And the vertical axis is the typical salary for that job out in the real world. That line connects the dots, and it shows you the going market rate for jobs as they get more valuable.
So, with all that market data, the company has to make a big strategic choice. Are they going to lead the market and decide to pay more than average? That's great for attracting the best talent, but it's expensive. Or will they just match the market? That's a pretty common and stable approach. Or will they lag the market and pay a bit less? Maybe they make up for it with amazing benefits or work-life balance, but it's always a trade-off. This one decision tells you a ton about how a company thinks about its people.
Okay, so the company has its market data, they have a strategy. Now what? How do they actually organize all their different jobs inside this new framework? Well, that brings us to step 3, defining pay grades.
See, before you create pay grades, all you've got is this collection of individual jobs, each one a single dot on that line. Every job has its own specific market value, and while that's accurate, it can be a total nightmare to manage hundreds of unique pay points.
And this is the elegant solution. The company groups jobs of similar value, so jobs with similar job evaluation points, into these buckets called pay grades. So instead of a mess of individual pay points, you now have a much cleaner, more manageable set of grades. A male clerk 2 and a secretary I could totally be in the same grade because the company sees their contributions as being on a similar level. But a pay grade isn't just a single number, it's a range, and building out that range is step 4. For every single grade, the company sets a minimum, a midpoint, and a maximum salary. This creates the official pay band, and it defines the absolute floor and ceiling for anyone whose job falls into that grade.
So the structure is built. Now, how does it actually get used in the real world? This is where it gets personal. This is where you come in. The system isn't just designed to set your starting salary. It's also built to reward your contributions over time, usually through something called merit pay.
And companies often use a tool that looks a lot like this merit pay grid. Your raise usually comes down to two key things. One, your performance review, and two, where your current salary is within your pay range. So if you're an exceptional performer, but you're paid kind of low in your range, you can probably expect the biggest percentage raise. But if you're already at the very top of your pay range, even if you're a superstar, you might get a more modest raise just to keep your pay within the structure.
Now that raise can show up in a couple of ways. A recurring increase is the one we all think of. It's a permanent bump to your base salary. But there's also a non-recurring increase, which is basically a one-time lump sum bonus. It's a way to reward you for a great year without permanently jacking up the company's salary costs. And honestly, it's a method that's getting more and more popular.
Of course, this standard blueprint doesn't work perfectly for every single job. Some roles are just different, and they need their own unique approach when it comes to compensation.
Take sales roles, for example. For a salesperson, their impact on the bottom line is often super direct and really easy to measure. Because of that, their pay is often tied directly to their performance through all sorts of incentive-based plans.
And there's a whole menu of options here. It can be anything from a straight salary with no extra incentives all the way to a commission-only plan where what you earn is 100% based on what you sell. The right plan really depends on the company's goals and what the sales cycle looks like.
So let's wrap this all up. A pay structure, when you get down to it, isn't arbitrary. It's a deliberate, pretty complex system. It's the architecture a company uses to manage pay logically, to stay competitive in the job market, and hopefully to create a system that feels fair and keeps people motivated.
It's a whole system of market lines and grades and ranges and performance grids. It's the machine that turns the abstract idea of your value into a hard number. So, the final question really is for you. Now that you know the blueprint, how does your own pay stack up?